I'm Wayne, and I am back to give you another Origami Studio tutorial. This time, we're going to be using the gyroscope, and we're going to be using the gyroscope to create these two different effects. So the first one, up on screen here, is a kind of holographic card effect with a nice gradient shimmer to it. The second one we're going to do is more of a simulated lighting prototype, where we have simulated lighting spotlights and different textures, or what looks to be different textures, on the card itself. And you'll find that it's actually the same technique, just applied in slightly different ways. So here's how we're going to go through this. We're going to do this in three parts. The first part is going to be setting up the gyroscope. And in brackets, I put forever because we're going to make an assembly of patches, and then we're going to put into a component and then drop that into your library. So you can put that in any prototype that you like from that point on. We're going to have a little bit of configuration to it, so you can still modify it as well. It's going to be great. And then we're going to have two variants, the holographic one and the simulated lighting one. These ones are going to be super fast because I'm going to show you some diagrams of how conceptually it works, but you'll see that once you do the gyroscope setup, this stuff is really easy, and you can probably find other creative ways to use that as well. So this should all be going a lot faster than the foundational tutorial. Okay, let's dive into setting up this basic prototype. So first of all, we want to get the gyroscope information. And so we're going to need a minimum amount of layout to do that. We're going to make a card base, which is really just a rectangle within Origami Studio itself. We're going to put that into a folder, even though it seems redundant. We're going to eventually put more stuff into this thing. So we want to be able to control the gyroscope's rotation against the folder itself. So the rotation is going to affect everything that is contained within. So really easy setup and starting point here. Let's get into it. Okay, let's do the basic layout here. So we have a blank file, really just made it. And now we're going to dive in here to the artboard, hit R, make a rectangle. And now I'm just going to size it to what I know is the proper ratio for a credit card that I've scaled down, 321, 509. I know the weird values, but you won't have to really think about this after this point. Now we're also going to make sure it's in the artboard. I'm going to call this card base. Going to group that as well. Card container, we're going to rename that. And now we're going to make sure that this is anchored to the center, and we're just going to go 0, 0 for the X and Y. All right, let's turn off that layout view because we don't need it anymore. And in the card container, if you just play with values, let's play with X rotation, just shift up and down here. Okay, that's going to move that kind of vertically, and the Y rotation is moving that. Z rotation is going to spin it that way, but we don't need that. So we are just going to grab the X and Y. We're going to click on each one, have separate values, because we might want to tune those separately. So I just like putting those in separately instead of going through the entire rotation axis there. And now we're going to double click here in the canvas, and we are going to type in motion. And you're going to see the device motion patch pop up. Perfect. Okay. Hold on, I'm just going to reconnect my phone. Okay, I got my phone connected, and if you have Origami Live installed and you're wired into your computer, you will now see that you're getting values from here. We're mostly concerned about the rotation rate, acceleration rate, doesn't really matter. We're just using the gyroscope here, not the accelerometer. So cool, we have values. We have 3 values here, and we need to break that up. So in order to do that, type unpack into the patch library here. You'll see a bunch of different options where we have 3 axes. So we're looking at 0.3D unpack. Double click that. Going to take the rotation rate, plug that in. And now we're going to just swing these over, connect Y to Y. We're going to connect X to X to see if that feels right. And now here we go. I'm moving my phone around, and this thing is moving. Technically moving, but not at all in the way that we want it to move. Let me pause for a second because I realized it doesn't have such a weird thing. I want rounded corners. I don't like the spiky rectangle in physical space here. Okay. So we have this going on, and that brings us to our first problem. Let's take a look at what that is. Problem 1, we're only getting the current rate of rotation and not an accumulated value for it. So what we need to do is every time this rotates, we want to be saving a bit of that value and then putting it back into that current rotation rate. That's such a weird thing to say. I'm just going to show you because it's going to be a lot easier that way. Let's start with a Y rotation. because that feels a little bit, it's just more ergonomic to also play with rather than this one, I find. So I tend to use that more in general. So how do we make an accumulator? First of all, let's make an addition patch. And we're going to plug this into here and back out to here. So it's not really doing anything because it's adding 0. But what we want to do is add, every time it is producing a value, you want to add that back in here. So how we're going to do that, we're going to use variables because it is just a little bit cleaner. So we're going to call this yrot accumulator. I'm going to plug this in here. And now we're going to also do a receiver, which is going to default to that one that we just created. And we're going to plug that in there. So now, check this out. As I rotate, it's keeping that value there. So that's a good start. You'll also notice that now that's actually accumulating the value, it feels too sensitive. So here's something I'm going to do over on this side. Multiply. I'm going to feed this value that's coming in here. And we're going to say multiply by 0.5. I mashed my keyboard. I meant 0.5, not 0.56. Let's just hit the reset button here. And this feels a little bit smoother, less erratic, too sensitive there. So there, we have an accumulator. Let's just double this up. Okay. Great. Now you can see that as I moved my device, it is sticking. However, check this out. Let's go a bit nuts. Now, my device is more or less in the position that I was holding it before, and the rotation is all over the damn place. And that's because, let's talk about problem number 2 that we're going to solve. The gyroscope isn't 100% accurate. Things kind of get nuts. And while I had a kind of excessive demo, even if I was just rotating around in my chair, that card would be rotating and it wouldn't be oriented to me, the user, anymore. So this is something that we can also solve in a kind of similar way. Okay, so this is what it looks like when I put my device down, which is exactly what we're trying to solve here. What we're trying to do, and actually let me just clean this up really quick, just hit a little tidy up and move this way out of the way. The reason why I've done this, by the way, is because this is the core stuff that's going to end up in our gyroscope patch. And this stuff is more about how it is being used in different ways, including the multiplier. You might have different multipliers for a bunch of different things, so you can adjust and tweak independently. So we're trying to solve this over here. What we want to do, have this return to its default position, have some kind of return behavior. So the easiest way to do this that I've found is, now that we have this, imagine that if this is at negative 72 degrees offset in this rotation, every frame I want to take a percentage of that and put it back in, so it basically returns to its 0 state. Again, weird to say, let me just show you. I'm going to make a multiplier here. Multiply. And we're going to call this return X here. I'm going to plug the X-rod accumulator in there. I'm going to multiply this by something really small and also a negative value here, negative 0.02. Okay. It's not going to make sense yet, but let's just keep watching. I'm going to extend that. You can just drag this to extend the amount of inputs in here. And now I'm going to plug this into that. And there we go. Because it's always taking a percentage of how much it is rotated. Also, we're applying a negative value to that, so it's going to subtract it. And when it goes into this addition patch, it's always going to get closer and closer to 0. And the more rotated it is, the faster it's going to be, because it's always a percentage of that total current rotation. Neat. So now whatever I do, it's going to return, and I can adjust how strong it is by just adjusting that value. Let's go ahead and do that to the Y rotation as well. I'll do that in between cuts. Okay, now we're back, and here we go. Also, you might notice that when I'm moving this X rotation, it feels wrong. It is the reverse of what I intend. So the way that you can deal with that is over here. This is why it's also good to have these multipliers outside. I'm just going to make that a negative 0.5. Great. Now it feels like it is moving as I intended it to move. And that's most of it. This is most of this gyroscope patch. Anything else that we want to do this on top of it is going to be cleaning it up. So let's start there. Let's clean this baby up and also make this feel like it is more modular. So I'm going to disconnect these temporarily, so it's not going to actually do anything. I'm going to select all of this. I'm going to hit right click there, group into component. We're just going to call this gyro tutorial patch. Sweet. Look at that. It's doing nothing. It has no inputs or outputs, but if you double click into this, you'll see, and it offset me there. This is our patch still. It's inside. Except we don't have access to anything that is outputting right now. So let's solve that. So to deal with components here, we're going to just click on this actual output dot, because remember, this was the output that we wanted, these two dots. And you can either go into component up here and hit publish port, but you can also see that it is option P. So we're just going to do that because it's a little faster. Option P, and that creates an output. So we're going to call that, let's just say gyro X. Click down here, option P, and gyro Y, once it accepts my keyboard input. So we have output patches. You see over here that we can now back up into the full prototype. And now you can see that the gyro tutorial patch has the X and Y values. So I can now just plug that back in to these, and we are back in business. But now I can connect this to any number of different things. One addition that I want to make is the return X. So you might have different feelings on how much you want that to return, or you might want to turn that off entirely by setting this to 0. So we are going to make a variable that controls all of this, and we're going to call this return strength. And I'll just set that to what it currently is, 0.02, which is again a weird kind of value, but it felt right to me. And then we'll put the receivers over here and plug those in. I'll just make a separate one to reduce crisscrossy lines, and we'll have that. So we can now also publish this to the top level of the component. So just select that, option P, and now we have return strength. So now we can modify that from this level. One more thing that I would add to this to make this a bit more user-friendly, I really don't like typing in -0.0 and then whatever I'm trying to tweak. So you can also do some fun stuff to remap this to something that is, say, 0 to 1 is what I'd prefer to do. So here's what we're going to do. Normally we use transition patches to do animation for a variety of different things, but we can also do this to make more human usable values. So I'm going to say 0 to -0.1, because -0.1 would be a lot of return strength. That's probably more than I'd ever want, but it's a nice kind of round number here. And then we're going to plug this in here, plug this over here. And now if I just change this return value to, say, 0.2, which feels like now a logical 0 to 1 value, you can see here that is being translated to -0.02. Now I don't really have to think about that anymore or type the minus key anymore, because that was a little annoying for me. But we have a clean gyro patch here. Okay, so now that we've done that, one step that I'm going to just mock up here for you, you can also hit add to user library. Oh, I intended to mock that up, but I guess it just did it. And now you can see that in my library, I have gyro tutorial patch, which I can just double tap and now drop in to my prototype as well. One thing I would caution you against, though, is if you're not ready to put it into your library yet, don't do it, because that prevents you then from editing it as well. So only do that for something that is really, really set. This one, I'm pretty comfortable with this because I do any kind of tweaking via the multipliers outside, because it is element specific, or the return strength, which is now exposed. So that is good to go. We are done step 1. Okay, Now on to the next phase. Now we're going to go over how to make this holographic version. So you can see that it is using the device motion, which you could also just turn on or off. Oops, my fat fingers are tapping the screen. Or you could also use it to apply to different values. So let me show you a diagram of what is happening here instead of going through this mess of patches. So this was the diagram we looked at before. So this stuff is still true. The gyroscope is applying its rotation to the card container. However, this prototype has a bit more going on. So there's our card container and the card base, but on top of that, we now have a gradient, and it is just an image asset. So on top of that, it is also stretching way out. It is super tall, and we are using the gyroscope to affect its Y position. In this case, we are using the Y rotation from the gyroscope to affect the Y position. So let me show you how that works. Really, this is the gradient that is just moving up and down. I'm going to turn off the clipping of this container so you can see what's happening. That's all that is. It's a really tall, kind of rainbowy gradient that is being shifted up and down based on the rotation. And it looks ridiculous when you don't have the masking on, but looks pretty good when the masking is actually active. I'll show you quickly in the patches as well what this looks like. So what we're looking at is Rainbow Linear's Y position. You can see that it has a transition as you'd expect, but I'm also using a progress patch to map the Y rotation. So the Y rotation, let's say that I have extreme ends of -90 and 90. So that's rotation 90 degrees either way. So the progress helps me remap that back into 0 to 1, which I then am able to map to 0 to whatever negative Y position value. And that's how this is being done. So check that out. As I move it around, that is all mapping over, and we're adjusting this Y position up and down. So it's defaulting to somewhere in the middle of its of that image asset, and that's how that works. You can also see that this logo, that's using a similar technique, and it's really, really easy. I'm just going to show you how that works right now. So there has a logo mask. I'm just going to unmask it. Check that out. It looks absolutely ridiculous in this form. But now you can see that there's just a there's an angular image asset here, the angular rotation, that is just being rotated and is just being masked out. Mask that, and now it looks shimmery. It looks like another additional holographic kind of print or sticker on top of this already holographic card. Easy, super easy. In terms of image assets, what is being used here is a shimmer gradient, and I sized this down just for this slide, but the actual export version was, I think, 4 by 2000. You could also make that 1 pixel wide. I just get paranoid about 1 pixel wide assets for some reason. As a logo mask, it has that angular gradient that I showed you, and it has like the contactless icon that I also put on the corner of the card because I thought it looked neat. And that's the entire thing. I'll have the actual package of all the assets, including the origami files, in the description, so you can just open that up and see all the details for yourself. Obviously, there is some additional fanciness going on here, but fundamentally, it's all that technique, the whole thing. Okay, let's move on to the next one, which is simulating lighting. And at this point, you can probably guess exactly how this is going to work, but let's look at the diagram. Here's a diagram of how this works. So same card container and card base, except now we have a group that is the pattern group. We have the pattern mask, and we have a light image on top of that. And now the gyroscope, instead of just using the gyroscope to affect the Y position, we're doing the X and Y positions at the same time. Let me show you the assets of how this is breaking down. Here are all the assets that are in this prototype. We have a pattern mask. We also have the spotlight image, which I'm using several times, just sizing and opacity tweaking to have different effects. And then we have a logo mask and silver foil, which is using the same techniques as in the holographic prototype as well. And you'll also see, actually, let me pull this up again. If we look at this, I'm trying to make this as big as possible too, so you can see clearly. The lighting is affecting that pattern, but is also affecting the backing because I've just layered it on because I thought that felt a little bit better, which comes across as I have the matte group, which is a solid base with a matte light, which is really the same lighting, except I've made it bigger and less opaque. And then we have that pattern mask, which is the same asset, fully opaque and smaller. So it looks like it is more intense, a bit shinier, like a more of a specular strength kind of thing, being completely simulated. And that's the entire thing there. So if I open up the dark card, you can see that I have UV, which is what I'm calling the pattern here, which has a color fill and then a highlight on top of that. And they have a couple of highlights on the matte one as well. You can see the stuff being moved as I rotate my device. And that's all it is. Aside from technique, like I did a bunch of adjusting of opacity values. So let's adjust the highlight that's on the actual pattern. It's too low, it looks a little dull. If it's too high, then it almost feels maybe too plasticky to me. So I arrived on some version of like a middle value there. I also add another highlight on the matte one that is below. So when you dip that direction, you see some lighting there. And that was just for feel, because when I was moving this around, it felt like that was getting lost into the background space a bit. So that's it. That's the entire thing. Again, I will have this prototype file up in the description for you. But yeah, that's it. Basically, once you have these clean values from the gyroscope, and the X and Y values in particular, you can do anything you want with them. Something that I just thought of that I haven't had time to try out is you could do a parallax effect too. Like you could have, instead of being a card, this could be a window, because a parallax effect in essence is things that are closer to you feel like they are moving more, and things that are further back feel like they are moving less, which is something you could do by just adjusting the multipliers applied to different assets, as long as they are layered in the right way. So you can absolutely do that with the exact same techniques we are using over here. Hopefully that was useful. Hopefully it came across. I tried to mostly focus on the gyroscope stuff and shorten this up by just using some diagrams for the rest, because really it is pretty darn easy once you get past doing the accumulation of values and making sure everything can reset to the same position. That's the hard stuff, and you only really have to do it once. Okay, that's it. If you've been watching, thank you for watching. This was the first out of 3 specialized tutorials. I'm gonna have one on doing a kind of iPod scroll reel, which was really finicky with the actual mapping of circular interactions. And we also have a kind of window one, which simulates a technique you've probably seen on the Apple App Store, when the feature thing pops up into the full screen and you can scroll into that. So that's going to be a quick and easy one as well. Okay. Thanks for watching. Like and subscribe if you want more of this. And I'm probably going to do some stuff that is outside of origami soon after, because yeah, there's some other interesting stuff out there that I want to try and make videos about. Okay. Thanks, everyone. Take care, and see you again soon. Bye now.